Hey everyone, welcome to an extra special edition of the Formula E Addicts podcast number 4. I'm Edward Hunter, your host. I'm with my friend Jack Giordmaina and our special guest Paul.
Good evening.
Hi everyone, obviously the regular viewers, you'll know me as the main journalist writer for Formula E. So for the ones that are obviously just joining for this episode, I'm part of the Formula E media people team, you could say.
Yeah, and you're very good at your job as well, I might add.
Well, cheers.
I'm Edward Hunter. I'm the host of the podcast and the head admin of the Formula E Addicts Facebook page and the Twitter page as well, I guess, by extension. I'm a big fan of the championship, and I'm also a big fan of the London ePrix, which is going to be the main talking point tonight. But someone who isn't quite so big a fan is Paul. So introduce yourself, Paul.
Yeah, hello. I'm Paul Cook. I live a couple of streets behind Battersea Park. I've been here about 20 years. I work in technology. I am interested in Formula E, and I've been listening to your podcast, sort of learning more about it. And Edward invited me on to talk about why people are getting so worked up around Battersea.
Yes, definitely. And it's a very important debate that I think it's worth having here. So, but before we get into all that, I just want to say quickly, because I don't want to forget about it. It's about a week or two ago, we had the tragic news that former Formula E driver Justin Wilson lost his life in an accident at the Pocono Speedway at the end of an IndyCar race, and dying at the age of 37. It was I know a somber note to start the podcast on, but it was. I know it's difficult for me to talk about Justin Wilson because I watched him in Formula One when I was a kid in 2003, and he was a bit of a personal hero for me. So I was very moved by all the tributes and everything that I saw. Obviously at Donington Park there was the 1 minute silence during testing, which I thought was a really nice touch because they didn't have to do that. And yeah, he was a really nice guy, and it's a real tragedy that he's gone because he could have continued. It was every chance that he could have come back to Formula E and had a strong career here as well as in IndyCar, which would have been a real coup for him. But yeah, any thoughts, guys? Jack?
Yeah, I think you covered most of the grounds. It's sad. We're all motorsport family. We're all one big family to be else whatever series you're in, and it's sad when you hear a loss. We've had quite a few recently.
Yeah, with Jules as well.
And but we just we pray. We all our thoughts with his family and friends, and that's all that can be said.
Yeah, it's very touching words by Stefan Wilson. Two things that really stood out to me that he said was. One, he said that if he could grow up to be half the man that his brother was, then he'd be a pretty good man, which I think speaks volumes about his older brother. And two was also the news that he gave that Justin had donated his organs after his death to save 6 more lives, I think, which I thought was just I think that must be some small comfort to us all, sort of when we think about Justin's demise, which is obviously pretty horrible. And it's sparked another debate about closed cockpits as well, and whether motorsport is dangerous enough. But I think maybe that's for another time. Anyway, let's dive right into the main reason why we're here, which is the whole Battersea Park debate, I guess. And I've been very dismissive of the protesters' view, and I think that's normal for someone who's a bit fan of the series because we sort of see them as a bit of a threat, I guess, and. I think from that standpoint, it's a little difficult to empathise with them. But I've been looking into. I think there's a valid point to get across, and I think Paul, I'd like you to make your case now about why you think that Formula E has made some mistakes and why it's been so controversial.
Okay, I thought I'd just kick off by. Saying something about Battersea Park and why it's both unusual and unique. If you look at London and around the M25, we have a huge number of parks, and that's one of the great things about London is the variety of parks in terms of size and how they operate. What's unusual about Battersea, if you sort of look at the map, is it's basically sandwiched between the River Thames and the railway lines running into Waterloo. So effectively, the movement through Battersea goes from west to east. You come in from Clapham Junction, Wandsworth way, and you move across into Vauxhall, into Waterloo. So most other parks in London, you've got access from all corners of the compass, where with Battersea, access broadly flows west to east during the rush hour in the morning and east to west in the evening going home. And I mention that because if you look then at Battersea Park from, say, sunrise when it opens, it's used as a commuter hub. So you get a lot of people going through the park, shortcutting to work or to school, or to a bus stop. So you get different types of traffic moving through it. Cyclists cutting through on the way to work, school kids. So that's the first unusual point about the park, is there's a huge amount of daily commuter traffic sort of ebbing and flowing through it at different times of day. And then you've got another sort of user, which is the local residents. And again, one of the great things about Battersea, and this is sort of a blatant advert from me, is you've got a full range of London housing and London life here. So you've got huge sprawls of social housing and housing estates. You've got the mansion blocks which wrap around the park itself. They were actually built to fund the construction of the park in the Victorian time, and they're full of flats. And then behind those, you've got Victorian houses, and then beyond that, you're starting to see modern tower blocks going up, and units for single people. So London Battersea is a real mixture of age groups, sort of social demographic backgrounds, richness and poverty. So the full range is here. So again, because of that, you couldn't typify who goes into the park, because they're all different types, and they're in there.
You're right there.
They're in there for different reasons, I think it's also a Londoner's park. So there's very, very few tourists sort of make the journey down to Battersea from central London. So you tend to get people who live in London who use the park. So it's highly appreciated and loved, I think, by the users for all sorts of reasons. I use it to go to work. I use it to hang out. My kids go to school through it. And a lot of people I've spoken to have sort of lived here all their lives. So the first thing I'd say about the park is don't assume it's just a bog standard park like Hyde Park, Regent's, and so on, Wimbledon.
We don't want to slag off too many parks, by the way.
Well, no, but they're all different. If you go down to Fulham Park next to Craven Cottage, it's different again. They've all got different types of character. And my point about Battersea is because it's landlocked, squeezed against the river, you've got this west-east effect of commuting. So I've seen some estimates of people looking at who's going through the park, and the number I've seen is about 35,000 people who are typically passing through that park and using it. And I said from a variety of backgrounds. I think another point to make about it is, as you're now finding out in terms of Formula One, collision between Formula One and Formula E next year.
Oh, the date clash, yeah.
Yeah. So out of that discussion about Formula One and could you shunt Formula E to the right a bit, Councillor Cook said, well, we've got 600 events going on in this park. And I hadn't heard that number before, but it's about right. So every weekend during sort of spring, summer, early autumn, you've got huge numbers of events. You've got dog shows, fun fairs. There's going to be a car show coming in soon.
And the week after, where we were talking about just now, moving the Formula, there's the is it the Bankers Fun Run or something?
Yeah, well, affectionately known as the Bankers Run. Officially, it's the JP Morgan Corporate Challenge Run, where 25,000 of the banking's finest come to the park over 2 days, and they run 5K. and they've got a big village set up, so they all stand around and talk about LIBOR rates and things like that. And it's a huge 2-day event, and obviously in the run-up to that, they spend a few days setting up the route and the tents, the marquees, bringing in the gin and tonics and so on. And so it's a big event, and that's next year, I understand, punching up against the Formula E weekend, which then overlaps with Formula One. But the bigger point the council have made is they're selling the park to 600 different customers to use it for different events throughout the year. And that's unusual. I don't think there's any other park in Wandsworth that puts that on. And as I said, because of that, it's a massive money maker for the council, and they sort of depend on that sort of revenue in part to fund, the upkeep of it, which feeds into them saying to us, look, we've got to do this sort of stuff just to balance the books. I mean, the other big point, which I ought to mention, is it's a Victorian park. And
it's heritage site as such, isn't it?
Yeah, and it dates back to about 1850s. It's got what's called a Heritage 2-star listing, which makes it particularly a special place of interest. The Heritage Lottery Fund spent about 10-12 million pound on it about 10 years ago, and what they did was they rolled out a lot of the sort of rubbish that had been put into the park in the sort of 60s and 70s, and they restored it to be Victorian. I mean, all the trees there are like 100 years old, that came in from Kew when it was set up. So when you walk through the park, you really are in this sort of time capsule of sort of 1850s. All the street lampposts, date back to they were gas lamps originally and have been converted. So the place is oozing with sort of all these historical sort of features that, people have sort of come to cherish, because a lot of this stuff is disappearing out of London. And you'll see, if you look along the River Thames, particularly around Battersea, all these huge, expensive units are going up. So there's a lot of sensitivity around not losing, the Victorian sort of heritage of London to all these developments. And again, I think that feeds into the emotional sort of mix that people are worried that the Riverside apartment projects are wiping out a lot of these historical places that will be gone for good. Once you start chopping these trees down, that's it. So that's the background of the park.
So you said there are 35,000 people, so I'll take it as 35,000 people that come into the park through the rush hour periods per day.
Yeah, I can't give you any science behind the number. It's a number I've stolen from someone else. That sounds a lot for one day, to be honest. I think I think 30-odd thousand people would be the sort of active numbers moving through that park, probably for me over a week. My point would be that you've got these tens of thousands of people moving through it, and then when you compare that to the consultation number, it's disproportionately different. So if you're trying to take a sample of opinion of a number, would you take a percentage of a number like 30 or 40,000, or would you take a sample of a bigger or smaller number? So I'd put that in as a stake in the ground to say, think of that sort of active number of people using that park on a regular basis before you add in the summer crowds having picnics and parties and sort of hanging out in the park during the good weather, where the number would really sort of soar after that.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I visited the park in April, a couple of months before the actual race, just sort of to walk the circuit, and it was the first time I'd been to the park, and a couple of things did stand out to me. One, like you said, all the trees, I didn't know they'd been imported from Kew Gardens.
Yeah.
In fact, the first time I heard of Battersea Park was through watching an episode of an old 70s cop show called The Professionals. There's a climax to
I remember,
takes part in Battersea Park.
I remember.
That's one of them.
They're always filming in the park. There's lots of films and TV programs, so that you often get these huge film vans with canteens and makeup and lighting units while they're filming scenes in the area.
Yeah, you can see the attraction there.
But let me move on to sort of the next stage. So that's the sort of what makes Battersea Park unusual in terms of its geography, who uses it, some of the historical points. Now, on the consultation side, as you know, the tradition is you consult in advance rather than in arrears. So if you're thinking of doing something big that might annoy people, it's usually a good idea to tell them before you publicise it rather than afterwards. So why Wandsworth and the London, Boris and his guys announced it 4 months in advance of the consultation, I don't know, but that really set them off on a bad foot. It's like the decision's been made. We're going to put Formula E into Battersea, and then a few months later, a consultation process kicks off. Now, the consultation process that was followed is sort of subject to myth and rumour. And what I've found out is it sounds like it took place in November. It was invite only. They invited some associations, one local one called Friends of Battersea Park,
yes,
which is, I would argue, quite a low-profile association that most of us don't know about or don't belong to. So certainly there were some associations who were involved in this consultation process, I understand. And when I spoke to someone from the Friends of Battersea Park, I said, are you a friend of Battersea Park supporting this? Seems a contradiction to me. And he said, well, no, we didn't support it. In fact, quite the opposite. So in looking at the consultation, and some of this is on public records that I can send you the links for if you want to look through the minutes.
No, we don't doubt what you're saying.
It's great reading, trust me. There wasn't a strong yes, let's do it from the consultation phase. In fact, quite the opposite. And every time I corner someone from Friends of Battersea Park and grip them by the throat, they insist that they didn't support it. And what they did say was, well, if you are going to put it on, there must be some restoration at the end of it. And when you dig into that, and I say, did you mean restoration each year, or did you mean restoration at the end of the 5 years? Things get very vague very quickly. And again, from the other consultation associations, the same point, who were talking about restoration at the end of the racing. So I think it was a bit of a amateurish consultation. If you talk to the residents of the area, and I would challenge anyone in Wandsworth Council to sort of argue against the point, it's proved impossible to find people who said, yep, I got a letter, I read it, it got my attention, I saw there's a consultation going on. So we understand that about 1,800 to 2,000 letters went out to people physically close to the park, somehow telling them about this consultation process, but not a single person has been able to find people who can say, yep, I got that. So they've been around the mansion blocks, they've been around some of the houses to say, look, did you get this consultation letter? So we'll never solve the mystery of these alleged 2,000 letters that went out. I mean, I didn't get one and I live next to the park, and trust me, I would have spotted it, because it's not the sort of thing you're going to miss. And the consultation was in arrears. So the first we really found out about this Formula E was when the heavy goods tractors started digging up the car park. And
really?
Yeah. And have you seen that photograph of those 4 tractors?
Yeah, we see
the runner behind. Well, the guy who kicked off the campaign, he lives facing onto the park in one of the flats in the mansion blocks. And of course, that was his first sight of Formula E. And naturally, he wasn't happy in terms of what is going on, why they dig out the park, and he started to dig into it, and Save Battersea Park campaign was born out of that. And ever since then, we've been effectively working backwards, swimming upstream to say what's been going on. How do we get to this point where you're digging up the park? Why are you digging it up? So we've been discovering in retrospect the sorry history of the consultation. And it's been a done deal. You know, we're going to put it on in 2015. You can't stop it. We've been through all the due process. Everything's above board. Go away has been the sort of council posture. And again, that's not helped in terms of winning friends and influencing people to support the use of the park for racing. And that was when you mentioned that notice you saw on the fencing. It came out of that when the heavy goods moved in and started digging up the car park. And ever since then, the campaign has grown organically, where they've been going around saying to people, what do you think? And are you for the use of the park, or are you against the use of the park? And a petition was set up that you've probably seen. People have signed up and put comments in under Safe Battersea Park. That's a good read if you just go through and read what people write.
I did read the description in the petition, and one thing I thought was quite funny was there was a comment in there in the sort of description. It said something like, "Oh, we don't want the park to be used by electric heads," and I thought it was just a really, I don't know, bizarre contortion of the word petrol heads for our series. And I don't know, I thought it was kind of funny that they thought that was some scathing insult or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hearing, and I don't think people are anti-Formula E. I think it's, in a way, it's just unfortunate that Formula E's chief exec has sort of blundered into this situation, brought the brand into some disrepute, antagonized people. I mean, this is...
Are you talking about Alejandro Gag specifically then?
Yeah. I think if you're launching a brand, if you're trying to say, look, this is fantastic, we've got this great new concept of Formula E racing, the way you bring it in and get people to support it, get interested and invest in it emotionally, you know, and physically, intellectually, is you do it in a positive way. You don't just say, look, here's a big boot, I'm going to step on you all, I'm going to stick it in the park, there's nothing you can do about it, shut up, go away, and here it is. That's not the way you build up a brand and, you know, win friends who are going to say, yup, we love Formula E. So I think what you're seeing is it getting the brunt of some of that anger. You know, I talk to people about it as well, and it's very interesting, very exciting, and it all makes great sense in terms of, you know, Formula E and what it's doing to the industry and sort of technology. It's just the way they've gone about introducing this into London, into Battersea, into this park, which is not professional, it's not elegant. In fact, it's quite arrogant. And I don't think Londoners just sort of like being pushed around, and when you do, they tend to say what they think and shoot from the hip. And I think now Formula E are going to have to do some backpedaling or reversing to say, look, how can we sort of oil the waters and calm things down and make people more sort of open-minded to this? Because we've started off on the wrong foot, and it probably wasn't intentional, I don't know. It's just they went about it in arrears rather than in advance. You know, they consulted after the decision had been made, and rather than going out to some of those tens of thousands of people, you know, who use the park, they went out to a few associations and this, I don't know, curious number of letters that we can't find. And so again, I think that's why you've seen such a strong reaction. from people who are regular users of the park, because they don't feel they were engaged into the discussion and they didn't understand what was going to happen. And I can promise you 99% of people will say, I had no idea what was going on until the concrete blocks started to arrive and the fencing went up and the building, it turned into a building site. So everybody's introduction to Formula E was the building site in the park for 3 weeks. You know, the event lasted for 2 days. The building site lasted for 3 weeks. Yeah.
Roughly, yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, it lasted for 21 days, you know. And again, the consultation process, when you look at what was declared in terms of startup shutdown, how many days the park was going to be shut, discrepancies there. But in the height of summer in June, you know, beautiful weather, sun is shining, people want to use the park. You know, the place looks like, you know, Basra. It's sort of like a war zone with, what was it, about 800 heavy goods vehicles coming in and out of the park delivering. So when you look at all those heavy goods vehicles, they're coming in or leaving from the east or west entrance to get into the park. So all of the surrounding streets feeding into the park had all these lorries arriving, so everybody knew about it. And that was their first introduction, Formula E, rather than a gradual, gentle sort of build-up through the press, through some consultation, you know, and so on. And I think that's why we're having this discussion now, is we're trying to retrospectively figure out what went on and why are people getting so anxious about it.
Paul, how do you feel about the council's sort of feedback form that they've put out, which apparently is going to help decide their decision whether they're going to end the contract early or not?
I think it's good. I'm glad they've done it. I wish they'd done it at the beginning, before the decision had been made, and I wish they'd...
But they're asking after the event now, I guess.
Well, they're at the contract gives Wandsworth a flex point. So I think my understanding is that this is the point at which either side can say, let's stop now for convenience and exit the contract. Otherwise, you lock in for another 4 years of fear and loathing in Battersea Park.
Or Battery Park, as the protesters so aptly called it.
What I want to bring up, because, you know, this is great, to be fair, you know, this is exactly what I thought happened in London, because London is, you know, I get council letters, and you get council letters, you read them, and then you forget about them. You know, it's just what happens. You know, I live in the borough of Ealing, and I feel this is a big event. Formula is a big event. I know it's a brand new motorsport and no one had heard it before, but it's a big thing. So what I don't understand is yes, Formula E might have, you know, got 4 months before, as you said, before the consultation process took place, Merch said, you know, they're looking at Battersea Park. They were ready to agree something with Battersea Park. I don't understand why then the consultation process was as bad as you say it was and didn't take into to account the local people, basically. So surely there's some part of blame on the Wandsworth Council itself to sort of say, well, why didn't you tell the people earlier? Why were you quiet months before the events, 2 months before the events? Why did it have to wait till diggers appeared in order for people to realise, well, what the hell's happening?
Especially when you think about it, Formula E Holdings, which is a Gang's company, won the contract to run, you know, the first ever FI electric vehicle champion way back in August 2012, and it was before the end of the year that they approached Wandsworth Council about putting the race in Battersea. So it was as early as August 2012, and it wasn't until 2015. That's 3 years when you think about it. That the residents didn't for all the world didn't really know what was going on.
Just what I don't understand is that how can something so big, just literally for 3 weeks, I went to Battersea Park in the build-up a week. I was part of the FI accredited media that I was there, and I was there the week before to see how it's going. And to be honest with you, you know, I can sympathise with, you know, the local residents and the people who use the park. I don't think Formula E were very efficient in how they did their work. You know, there was a few bits I thought if we were a bit towards the end after they realised, look, this has started off. I think, to be honest with you, the build process started very shaky in terms of general health and safety. But towards the end, I saw more people seeing turn up in high-vis jackets directing, and I did realise that once you've got past the carriageways, let's say, the bulk of the park, the middle bit of the park where the fountain is and the green areas around there, once you immerse yourself with the trees, you sort of forgot that Formula E was actually here. You couldn't really see the concrete walls. It was just getting to that green bit, which seemed to be like, a massive effort. So my question to that is maybe from working from last year, maybe the ones on council can say, look, this didn't work very well. Yeah, how can we improve this to make more efficient, to maybe reduce the build time, maybe from 21 days to 18 days, to make it more efficient in sort of that way. But I don't understand how something so big can just be completely forgotten.
Yes. Let me comment on that, Jack. It was the opposite of efficient. It was Dad's army. It was shambolic and amateurist, and there was nothing elegant or professional about the setup. When the blocks started to arrive on the Sunday, day 0 rather than day 1, Monday, it went downhill quickly. And I'd ask you, is there any building site that you see in Ealing or where you live that you could walk onto off the street? And the answer is no. You're simply not allowed to walk onto building sites. There are guys from day one doing access control. Every single vehicle is escorted. It's signalled in properly. And if you just stand and watch any building site in London or around the country, they're run very well nowadays, and they're run professionally. If you look at what happened in Battersea Park, it was Dad's army. It was just amateurist. People were cycling along. There were no obvious routes because the workers didn't arrive until 8 o'clock to start the set. And by the time they'd set up some semblance of a route, the commuters already gone through the park, and it just went on and on and on. And eventually, if you look at some of the photographs, to try and get through this sort of ring of steel into the centre of the park got increasingly difficult. I'd go through the park and I'd say to someone, which way do you want me to go? And he'd say, go down that way. So I went down that way, and then someone would say, no, you shouldn't be here, go that way. And we were being directed on whim by people who were just sort of making this up as they went along. So I wrote to the council afterwards. I put a freedom of information in. I said, look, could you send me your risk register of how this project looked at the risks and issues of setting up this sort of building site, so I could look at what the risk assumptions, dependencies, mitigations and all that you guys had put in place before you arrived. And the answer from the council, and I can send you the letter if it was, sorry, we've deleted it. And I said, sorry, yeah. And I wrote, and they said, I hope that answers your question. And I said, well, it doesn't. Surely it's on computer back. Have you not done an archive of the risk register? Could you pull it off of an archive tape? And this was over the last month or so. Cut a long story short, the answer is no. Wandsworth Council have deleted anything to do with planning the setup of the park in terms of risk management, health and safety. So they referred me to Formula. They said, well, Formula E. So I said, well, could you ask Formula E then, please, to send me their risk register so I could have a look at it? And then the answer came back, no, because they don't have a risk register. The information is spread over thousands of files, and it's not easy or economic for them to pull together a recognizable risk register. So in my day job, if we didn't have this for a project, the project would not go ahead. And I would ask anyone in the business of running projects, either physical or technical, doing stuff like Prince 2 and the like, how far they would get without a register looking at the physical, commercial, sort of health risks and so on. So there's none of that. So I would challenge anyone you guys know to give me anything that they could use from this year to make next year better, or if they could give me anything from this year that shows someone sat down and said, is it a good idea to have school kids walking along next to an HGV blocks? Yeah. And if you can find somebody who can give it to me, I'll buy you a beer.
Damn.
Well,
I have tried for 2 months to get anything to show me someone didn't just make it up as they went along. And I've done this through freedom of information. I've done all the, it's painstakingly boring to go through the process. And the answer is it doesn't exist. What we had has been deleted, and what's out there is not structured to give it to you, Paul, to have a look at.
What I find interesting is, why would they delete it? This is your council, to be effective. This is your council. If there's a problem, you go to these people. And, same with any council. But I don't know how they can be... I know we're looking at maybe, and people have been arguing, whether or not Formula E, rightly or wrongly, but, I feel like, from what you've said, there is a share of the blame across, the whole of the board of why people weren't known. How can a risk assessment, basically, be deleted from a council computer? That, to me, doesn't make sense.
There's definitely a big gap in our knowledge here.
That's assuming Jack had existed in the first place, and whether anybody asked for it.
And I think I would be appalled from Formula E's point of view. Even though I know I would say I'm a supporter of Formula E. I'm just the media, so I write about it. It's become my job, so I sort of have to support it in a way. But in terms of they're a big company. You would expect any company to form a risk assessment. So the fact that they're saying it's deleted, they must. Well, to me, that says that was something there, but why would they delete it? That's something we have to seriously get onto Wandsworth Council about. You
see, the other aspect, the reason I asked the question of the council was, given this year was such a shambles, and given, frankly, we're lucky no one got injured or killed in the setup and shutdown, is there any learning process to make next year better? What are you going to do next year, assuming it gets past the flex point? What are you going to do next year? That's simply not a repeat of this year. Is this going to be 5 years of hell where the place just becomes a building site with kids and commuters, coexisting with HGVs? And the only way you can do that is by looking at what your risk planning said in the first place and say, right, which of that was true and which of it was wrong, and why was it wrong? What did we underestimate? But, seeing is believing. If anyone who can stick this document in my hands, I'll believe it existed in the first place. It's deeds, not words, right? I want to see it to believe it ever existed. And I cannot believe in a technology era with computer backups, cloud storage, and all of that you can simply lose a document. I mean, the thing is only just finished, for God's sake. How can you delete and not be able to retrieve a risk document weeks after the end of Formula E? It's simply not possible in my mind. And then if I was Spade Oaks or the building contractor, or if I was Formula E, the council should be able to turn around to Spade Oaks and say, guys, just give us your register. We've got this guy making trouble. Could we just pass it through and redact anything you don't want him to see? And that would have been fine. But the answer is no, I've been defeated. So next year, if this takes place, press the reset button. Let's start from zero again, and let's make the mistakes all over.
I know this is deadly serious, but I know a lot of our viewers would be big Formula E fans, so I'd like to impress upon them that you are not to forge this document. Under any circumstance, you are not to forge this document. I know we want to keep the image clean, obviously, naturally, and want to defend it, but we can't. We're not going to lie.
Take up the beer offer, do you?
They want that beer, yeah. That's than anything. Yeah.
The serious point is, I used to take my daughter to school through that park, like people are doing nowadays. And if you look at the photographs, it's toe curling to look at these kids cycling alongside this building site with HGVs and scaffolding, everything else. And it's an accident waiting to happen. And I don't know how anybody got away with it. I really don't. And again, that's what's annoyed us, is having forced this onto Battersea Park, you've created this chaos of a building site for 3 weeks, for 2 days of racing where it looked great, and for the rest of the month it was absolute chaos and it was a dangerous place. And so I just said, guys, just show me the thinking that went into this so we can trust that it will get better, and that's hit a blank. Can I just ask you, just what I'd like to know is, why does Formula E want to put these amazing cars in year one in such a small, constrained park? You've got lousy sight lines with the trees. You've got very, very small carriageways of, and as fast as you can accelerate, you've got to de-accelerate. It strikes me as not suited to fast, high-speed racing. That's a spectator sport. Is it just a showground to drive round at, suboptimal speeds? Why do you guys want to be in this park that everybody's getting so defensive about it?
I think, look, I agree with you in a way. I slightly agree with you in a way, simply because I I even asked Alejandro Agag myself. I said to him, look, in 5 years' time, when you want, say even 3-4 years' time, when these cars are predicted to go nearly double the speeds that we're going now. And I said, this track's going to be outgrown. You can't race it because, the cars will just be unsafe. And he said, well, yeah, but once we get to year 5, he said, it all turns to zero. But then I said, like how it is last year in terms of speed, because they'll have the technology and they have to go back to the 150 kilowatts that they did this year in order to make the battery that they improved technology, let's say, last the actual whole race rather than the car swaps that we saw at Battersea Park. But I said, look, the tracks, they're going to be outgrown. It's a serious problem. Obviously, some of them, when you go to cities like when we go to Long Beach and say Buenos Aires and Argentina around the world, obviously they're huge streets and government funded basically in order for it to happen. So you can use the big streets, so the cars are never going to outgrow this track, you can say. But Battersea Park, to be honest with you, yeah, they will outgrow that circuit, but the problem is that putting Formula E at the moment in London is, and you'll know, I'll know, Edward will know, is unbelievably difficult. Where on earth in London are you going to close streets unless you go out of London? And I say probably to like the boroughs of Ealing and somewhere else like nearly the Olympic Park and it's a couple of miles out of London, but they want to be right in the centre of London. So where in the centre of London can you possibly close a road? And the answer is you can't, because if you close a road for 5 minutes basically in London, the whole of London shuts down basically, because if you close Oxford Street or Regent Street, any of those streets, and Battersea Park gave them an opportunity where they didn't have to close any of the roads and they could still get a race on a couple of miles away from the London Eye and Big Ben. So that's why they wanted Battersea Park. But I think as a sustainability thing, in terms of, going over the next couple of years, whether or not Formula E cars will be able to drive in Battersea Park is a completely different question. Because I believe, and I think quite a few of us probably will believe, that the cars will have outgrown the circuit, so therefore there is no point in driving in Battersea Park because we can't get a race anywhere there at the moment.
Well, talking about the speeds in the park, one thing that did disappoint me a little bit, I have to admit, was that in the original plan for the track, I think there was only 1 or 2 chicanes in the original planning of the track. And then a few months later, when they released the finalised one, not only did they change the direction that the track was going in, which I thought was probably the right move in retrospect, just changing direction, but they added at least 3 more chicanes, I think. Obviously, there's the car park at Prince of Wales Drive, 2 chicanes there, and there was the other one I talked about. I think those were not on the original layout. And from two points of view, I'm kind of disappointed. From the racing fan point of view, you want to see the cars going as fast as possible. Obviously, we talked about that. Maybe cars will outgrow the track in a few years. But also, I think you want to see them going at the highest speed possible, and that's why I always thought that the turn just after, just going away from Prince of Wales Drive onto into the chicane, that's the fastest corner on the track, and I thought that would have been made much more impressive without those 2 chicanes on Prince of Wales Drive. But in retrospect, I can understand why. That's probably something that the FIA have raised with them about max speeds. They don't want it to be ridiculously high, especially around around the park.
height,
But
so-
and also from the residents' view, that those are two things that were sort of put under the radar and sort of, I don't know, secretly put in afterwards. I do feel that was kind of a bit dishonest, and they should have been upfront and said, we're probably going to need to put a couple of chicanes somewhere where the speed's going to be quite high otherwise.
What I was going to say was that the ability to modify the track is going to get progressively more difficult, because it means you're going to have to start hacking into the park and getting trees out the way, getting tarmac down, and it's going to be more of the same in terms of this heritage park. So you've chosen a park where you can't arbitrarily move the track around, widen it, change the route. You're very constrained by the Victorian design of the park. It was just this oval, sort of shaped carriageway for horse and carriage, and that's it. We're surrounded by trees, and I think if they're going to come back in future years to try and modify the layout, it will get more bloody in terms of sort of protest, because I've not touched on the impact of the park itself in terms of the what's in there in terms of trees, etc. So I think it's going to be problematic. So I watched the race over the 2 days on TV, and I just thought, well, it's not a race. It's not big enough to have cars overtaking, accelerating, and making it a really exciting introduction to have Formula E in its future. You're constrained by this small park. Can't you put it somewhere that's big and wide enough to let these cars let rip, make it an exciting race?
I disagree slightly in the terms of, I thought the races were really exciting. To be fair,
Yeah, same here.
Saturday was the thing, but in terms of what Sunday produced the British winner. You had the drama at the end, the overtake from Nelson Piquet Jr. with the championship, and I think that's another great thing for London, is that it is the championship finale, so it's going to attract so many British people, you could say, motor racing fans, because it is a championship finale, and it's very rare that British people who are huge motor racing enthusiastic can actually watch a championship finale in front of their eyes. That is actually for a major FIA World Championship. You have Formula 1, but Silverstone's halfway through the year, and the championship's still anyone's game when you go to Silverstone. Yeah. So for British people, I think that gives them a good chance. I think the racing, overtaking was difficult, 100%. Agree with that. But
well, you could say the same about Monaco and F1, and that's still its most famous track. Although, of course, completely different
circumstances, because that's another government funded, and even like the royal family funded sort of track. Another reason why Formula E managed to get there. But overtaking was very difficult, and when we did see overtakes, for a motor racing fan, it was like, whoa, that was a great overtake, because you weren't expecting to see overtakes at that track, and when you saw a few down to the chicane where the car park was, doing, and I think, the speeds of these cars at the moment, they can only do 150 miles per hour, and acceleration's decent, but it's not like, we're not talking Formula 1 levels, we're talking a couple of, at this present day, we're talking quite a few categories below Formula 1 in terms of acceleration speed and power and all that stuff, because it's a completely brand new technology, as we touched on. So the cars look slow, because no offense, but they are kind of slow, but I think
they're always going to be in the first year, but
they're going to increase, and they're only going to increase slightly as much the technology. So next year they're 20 kilowatts, technically they should be 20 kilowatts of a second faster. There's not such a thing as a 20 kilowatts second faster, but they're running at 170 kilowatts, so that's proposed. It's yet to be confirmed, but it's nailed on in terms of, it should be 170. So they should be in the races, should go a little bit faster, so lap time should be a bit quicker, and it should hopefully be a bit more of a show. Whether or not that will aid overtaking or de-aid overtaking, you could say, is another matter. But I think the racing was good, but I do agree that, in terms of the standards, the Wandsworth Council need to, in my opinion, from tonight's show, they need to buck up their ideas, and actually, plan out consistently, make sure things, it's their responsibility. It's Formula E's responsibility as well that, Space Doke and all the tractors and HDVs are behaving themselves. But it's also the responsibility of Wandsworth Council to make sure, because, they've authorised this event. They should be the ones making sure that everything is going shipshape that the contract stated, and if it's not going ship-shape, someone should be getting paid and someone's head should be chopped. Not literally, but someone someone should be told off for these things. And I think they need to
someone needs to take responsibility. It definitely seems a bit like it's a little bit shifting blame here and there.
Yeah, I think they were conspicuous by their absence. That there was no one in the park where you could go up to and say, "Look, could you sort that out? That's dangerous." So there was no governor or boss from the council. I think they've signed the contract. They've taken the money from Formula E. I think they've transferred to you guys responsibility for running the event, and all the liabilities, etc., have been transferred. I think the brand, the future of the brand, how it's perceived in Battersea Park, will be entirely a function of how Formula E and Spade Oaks, run the business. You're not going to get leadership from Wandsworth Council. They just need the money to balance the books. These are public serving, public government people who don't know a risk register from a raid farm.
And I don't want to feel like I'm rubbing salt into the wounds, but we all saw, obviously, in the Saturday race how that they hadn't anticipated that the bump at the first corner, that the speeds that the cars would be coming at it would cause the cars to jump up into the air, and it did actually cause a big accident in practice, fairly big accident in practice. Thankfully, I think it was it D'Ambrosio? Yeah, who had that, or pretty much a suspension failure caused by that bump, and so what ended up happening was that they brought the wall out
and resurfaced the area.
And they resurfaced it overnight, but of course for the first race they couldn't do that in time for the race. So in qualifying, what they ended up doing was that they had to start the race behind the safety car and create a sort of temporary barrier that they extended out. Well, and I thought that could have been I know maybe it's not quite so bad as some of the other things we've been talking about, the cancer, but I thought that could have been avoided. That should have been foreseeable, maybe.
What I thought was what was interesting with what Paul said is that he said that the Wandsworth Council won't take leadership in something like this. And yes, I know that they're doing this consultation now, we say, with the thing. But what he said there, which is an important thing, over the 5 years, I think it's a £1 million contract that Formula E are providing Wandsworth Council, and plus, and that is to go to help restore the parks, so like toilets, parkways, if there's any trees that need, coppicing in order to make them look pretty and so forth, and fixing sidewalks and lampposts and whatever the park needs. But what he said there was that, they've taken the money and technically ran and said, okay, we've got the money, here's your event, do what you want with it. And do you feel like, I don't know, honestly, from your perspective, we've got this survey, do you think, because they've already got the money and they could still get more money for years going by for the next 4 years, because I don't think the whole 1 million's come in the first year. I think it's been like a sizable chunk, but there's more money to come as the races go by. Do you think they're going to we only want this money, so does it matter what you say because we just want the money?
I mean, I think that's their position. We've tried unsuccessfully to engage with any councillor. If I look at my local councillors, Nardelli, Hanson and co, these councillors don't respond to letters. They don't come back. Everything gets passed up to the lead on this councillor, Jonathan Cook. And there's no dialogue taking place even now between the council and the residents. And it's just a silent black box. So if you guys are thinking that the council are going to be putting deep thought into making this a superb venue, I just don't think it's going to happen. I remember there's 600 events. You're one of 600 events taking place in the park every year. It's a high value contract, but that's all you're getting is access to the park for 21 days to stage a 2-day event. And I think they're looking to you to figure out the racetrack and the chicanes and all of that. You're not going to get deep thought coming out of councillors who struggle to answer an email. And that's just fact. There's not a lot of deep thinking taking place. And, we've put in freedom of information requests for information. It doesn't exist. Because I personally think, did it ever exist? Or has it been deleted, never to be found again? So I'm feeling a little bit glum about the year one. You're right, it was exciting to watch, But I'm thinking, as in successive years, as the technology gets progressively better, are you going to outgrow the park? How are you going to constrain it within the confines of the park? What are you going to do if you need to make substantial changes to the course? And we've not even talked about the customer fan experience, the spectators in the stands yet. But I think it's up to Formula E to decide how they want to take the brand forward and make it a great, fantastic event. Sort out what happened this year. Don't just delegate it to local government people in Wandsworth. I think Formula E should own the future of their brand. They should take it. They should almost be offended that we're annoyed with them. They should say, guys, this is the greatest thing to be happening in the UK. Get on board, and making it a big brand that everyone gets excited about, rather than stumbling into these arguments and protests and disagreements and Dad's Army setups. I don't know, why did he not use barges to ship in all the concrete blocks? The kudos and interest he would have got shipping into the park from the river would have been huge.
The big gaps between the races, and the reason for that is that because they ferry it between countries by boat. So, yeah, there's a decent point. I think also it could be just inexperience, that because of like you said, the unique kind of situation at Battersea, that they're having to do it a lot quicker than other venues, so they get up to a month to set it up and pack up. And initially they said they wanted to use Armco apparently, and they ended up having to use concrete blocks, which were less invasive, I guess, by comparison.
Well, the Armco was apparently assessed, and it would have done too much damage, they said, to the park, whereas concrete blocks would have done less damage. Well, they say little to no damage, but let's say less damage. I don't know, Armco barrier.
If their intent was to have a low impact event, I think they failed personally, and I think we can show that and say that's why people are angry. That's why people felt threatened and at risk, and that's why there's been this sort of local response saying, please don't do it again.
What about noise during the actual 2 days of the race? Because I when I heard people complaining about that, it's going to be really noisy. I would have thought, well, surely it's electric cars then.
It was the helicopter. It was sort of Camp Bastion. We had 3 days of this helicopter pilot looking for his keys, as I sort of say. He just kept flying around and around and around and around, and it drove us all mental, having this low altitude helicopter that just wouldn't leave, just filming. And it's all, the police come over when they're looking for someone and they go off again. This guy didn't leave until he needed to refuel, and they did a pre-day filming on the Friday, and that was the noise, and none of us saw that coming. I don't think even Wandsworth Council saw that coming, and you wouldn't hear the cars through the noise of the helicopter, frankly. And then during the shutdown phase, they thought it'd be a good idea to work till 10:30 at night, and we got some video of that. So it was the noise of the construction site. Imagine you got all the blocks wrapping around the park, so they enjoyed the building site set up and shut down over the 21 days as well. So I think it wasn't the cars that were noisy at all. That was the least of it. It was the building site and helicopter, and the lorries as well, HGVs coming in and out.
I agree that the helicopter, to be honest with you, when I was in the media centre, when it hovered over the media
and
centre...
the other thing is that the helicopter didn't even give that good shots, did it? Because all the trees.
Well, but I can understand that it was loud, when you're over the media centre, suddenly you couldn't hear anything, really. You're trying to listen to a monitor and you couldn't hear what was going on, which was a bit annoying. But, I can understand that maybe that was not expected. In any sort of motor racing event now, we always have the helicopter that flies around and, that gets. But, that can easily be a factor that was definitely overlooked. And maybe, did we need a helicopter camera, you know, from the way the tree's gone. Maybe you can look at the film.
That's something that you'd need to ask Aurora Media, wouldn't you?
Well, there's something that you can, well, if the council wanted to say, look, we didn't like the helicopter, and you could, you know, if you showed the helicopter shots and said, look, we hardly saw the car, the tree was in the way, then you can maybe put up a case to say, you know, the helicopter, you know, didn't add a beneficial experience to the TV audience, let's say, and it didn't give a beneficial sound for the local residents and the people at the event. You know, that could be something that can be looked at. It's just what I find interesting, and what I didn't know, which I know now, which surprised me in a way because I thought that they would, is that the Wandsworth Council sort of, as you said, didn't take any ownership of what was going on, and sort of allowed formally the stamp. Because if you allow anyone, you know, if you're going to allow them, you know, to do whatever they want, and you're not going to tell them off for what they're doing, they're just going to carry on. And, you know, that's what I can see. That's what the residents and what the local people are scared of, and they don't want that to happen again. They don't want Formally to come over their park and stamp over them and forget understandable, about them and forget about them for 3 weeks. I completely agree to that.
I think the guys doing construction, Spade Oaks, did the best they can in the circumstances. I think they were trying to minimise. They were trying to do what they could, but the impression was it was being made up as they went along. There were no pre-designed plans of, right, this is where the bikes will go, this is where pedestrians will go, this is where, you know, and so none of that had really been thought through. And as the site got built, the routes changed, and it was like working out in arrears. How do we get, because there's 4 access points, you know, the corners of the rectangle to the bridges, the way people moved in the park, you know, they say to you, well, where are you trying to get to? You say, look, I'm trying to get to Chelsea Bridge, or I'm trying to get to Albert Bridge. And so could you get into the centre of the park? Should you go around? So none of that had been thought through. And as the site got erected and then deconstructed at the end, it was just chaotic. And so people trying to get through, but asking where do I go, or just just going. In Londoners, they just went for it. So I think the construction company would catch up all the time, and then suddenly all these guys arrived in high vis trying to tell you where you couldn't go, and that sort of just made it worse in a way because they all contradicted each other. So it was just 3 weeks of that type of unpleasant experience for people who use the park every day of the week through the year.
What I find interesting is that, okay, you know, when we talked earlier in the show, we said, you know, you said, what could we learn about it? And obviously when we have no risk assessment to go back from what we've learned, how can you potentially learn from the mistakes you did last year? But from eyewitness accounts and so forth, that, you know, these things are wrong. No one can really, you know, I can't defend these things. You know, I saw them for myself. You know, you saw it. It was the authority from the building company came far too late in terms of where the people go. This sort of thing needed to be planned out day by day. Okay, you know, and signs put up clearly, so everyone can see. If you have a bike and you want to go to here, this is the route, follow signs for that gate and follow around. So, you know, you needed people to, you know, just to still guide you, but, you know, you sort of follow the signs. This sort of thing is simple and easy, really, to set up, and it was just completely...
It is easy. It's just called pre-planning, and that's what I don't think happened. And, I mean, maybe I should ask them for their post-mortem report. You know, any good project does a post-mortem, what work, and have they gone through and produced something to say, what have we learnt from that? What are we going to do next year? I don't know. Perhaps we'll ask for that next.
Yeah, I think it's from this. I think even it's worth formally people asking, okay, what worked well, what didn't work well. You know, because there are things. There's things in every project that worked well, and there's things that didn't work well. We're touching on the things that didn't work well here, and we need to improve those things in order for people of Battersea Park to have a much more pleasant experience. Yes, it's going to be difficult, maybe 2.5 weeks, but if it's planned properly, and you know there is some sense of there is some sort of like these people know what they're doing, then it doesn't feel as bad. You know, that's natural. You know, if you go up and you say, "Oh, go left," and the next person go, "Oh, go right," but I just came that way. Oh, well, what are you talking about? And then that makes a really bad impression, and that's something that is simple and easy, as we've said just now, that we can rectify. And we can maybe put a case forward to the council, say, well, if you go ahead with this event next year, this needs to be in place, and if we don't do this, then we're going to be in hell.
Yeah, and can I just say, for me, plan A is to stop the event. So I'm hoping we flex the contract later this month and say, let's not continue. So that's not what you guys want.
Well,
if it goes ahead in Battersea Park next year, I would strongly recommend to Formula E to get in and do the consultation and engage with the residents. That isn't going to happen and hasn't happened with the council, and start to make it a positive thing. If Formula E go, we've got the renewal, we're going to carry on next year, fantastic, let's forget about it now, it's just going to happen all over again. So if you go on to year 2 in Battersea, I would say to Formula E, get in there proactive, show leadership, don't rely on the council to do it, because I tell you they won't do it, and start to build the brand up, start to establish Formula E as something to be proud of in London. Don't just shoehorn it in next year and hope it'll be all right on the night next June. And you know what? When we asked them for when we asked the council for some more information, they said we can't give it to you because that would prejudice us going back to market at the end of 5 years. So the thinking is that if the contract continues for 5 years, then is it going to be 6 to 10 years after that? Will there be a renewal for more racing in the park? And is it basically the end of the park as a viable Victorian heritage park for residents and commuters? So there's a lot at stake.
Let's not exaggerate, but we would definitely compromise the park, for that part of the year, definitely.
Well, it's the 1 month, it's June, it's the best month of the year when people want to be out in the sunshine, and you turn it into a building site. And
exactly, I'm not disputing that at all. But,
and do you want that for 5 years, and do you want the option to extend to 10 years, which is what the council sort of said in their reply? We can't give you information because that doesn't help us do a commercial renegotiation. So that's why the campaign is trying to get this thing cancelled.
It's probably my last question at the moment. It's just, okay, you've got the campaign, you want to stop it, which is fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I don't disrespect or anything for that. I think it's perfectly fine. I think from the experience that you've recalled having, and I do believe it's quite a poor experience, I don't blame you for stopping it. But my question is, do you feel like the Battersea Park, do you think it'll have an influence on the council? Because the way the council that you've portrayed seems like, we'll tell them that it was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. They feel like they're not listening to you. So are you scared in a way, or worried in a way, maybe scared is not the word, worried that you'll put all these attempts in, get the thing, but it makes no difference?
I think I'm going to give a personal opinion. I think there are council who run a financially tight ship. Fiscally they're very strong. They know the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's quite right that they should run a tight ship financially because, London costs a lot of money to run services. They've merged recently a lot of their back office with Richmond. They're doing a lot of reorganisational restructuring where they're downsizing the senior management team. They've got this huge back office of public sector people supporting day-to-day Richmond and Wandsworth. And that's where their focus is. I looked at, what does £500,000 buy us, which is the money we thought they were getting. And that's the cost of sort of 3 of their senior managers. So if they're getting £500,000 to £1 million in the scheme of their payroll, that's a spit in the ocean. You'll see what Bob Geldof said about it in the petition, because he lives next to the park. And I think their focus is to run a financially stable council where everything is paid for and balanced, books are balanced, which is fair enough. And they turn around to the electorate and say, and we give you the lowest rates in London, vote for us. And that's the way they see it. There's only one councillor, James Cousins, who I can send you the details through, who's changed his mind, and he went from supporting it to saying, no, I don't think this is right. And, he's now on the perimeter because of that change of position, because he's not towing the party line. It's not a council that enjoys debate or welcomes debate, and that's just evidenced by the fact they don't do it. The councillors themselves don't engage locally with their wards and their electorate, and again, that's evidenced by their refusal to answer any contact they've had from their, the residents here. And, what are you expecting them to do for you next year? This is just a contract. They're getting paid to sell you access to the park, and the money's been allocated. They've spent it and allocated it into their budgets.
So from that, honestly, from an honest, I know you don't want the race to go ahead, but from that, you're thinking the race will go ahead.
Well, if I was Wandsworth Council, if they do terminate this for convenience, they've got a hole in their budgets for the next 4 years that they're going to have to make up some other way. So whatever they've balanced against the Formula E revenue, in terms of what they've spent it on, they're going to have a hole in their books. And you've got, elections coming up. That's not the sort of problem you want to have. And I just think that's how governments work. They work almost in arrears. So they've signed a contract for 5 years. They've got that plumbed into the books. They can't suddenly turn around and say, look, we've got 3 weeks of Battersea Park free next year. Who can we sell it to? You're not going to find, I would guess, people rushing in to pay for the park next year. Because most corporates, like JP Morgan, you strap these things up years in advance.
Yeah.
These are slow-moving decision cycles. So I think councils tend to be risk-averse and maintain the status quo. So my guess is they're minded just to continue with Formula E because they've decided to do that. But both they and you guys can look at the issue with Formula One and say, if we need flexibility in the future, such as clashing between the different races, is Battersea going to enable us to be flexible? If we need to change the track, are you going to be flexible? So if I was Formula E, you'd be having those discussions with the council to say, what do the next 4 years look like? How much scope have we got to make this a fantastically great racetrack event, an experience?
So in terms of the Formula One clash, well, obviously that's the story that we're all waiting to find out when the date of this race will eventually be, if it goes ahead.
Yeah.
So from that, do you think that the money that Formula E, obviously the money's quite big in Formula E, and you think if Formula E were to maybe even add some more money, I don't know what the contract negotiations, I don't know what negotiations are going, but if they wanted to, because obviously they're desperate, Formula E, I'm telling you now, are desperate. They want that race move. They can't have it clashing with the British Grand Prix.
They already clashed with Goodwood Festival of Speed last year, and that's why I couldn't be there on Saturday, because I was at Goodwood, and then I was at the Formula E finale on Sunday. So there is definitely that. It'll draw that audience that they want away from them.
So they're desperate. They want it to be moved, and I think Formula E will do whatever it takes, basically, to move the event another week. And that means if that has to switch an event, a couple of weeks earlier to accommodate for the Formula E, I reckon, that's from how you persuade. I'm not saying that you portray them in a bad way. I'm just, to be honest with you, I reckon that's how most councils throughout the whole of London work. I don't think this is just a Pacific Wandsworth, problem.
Specific.
Yeah, I just think this is how it's run. They wanted to, and that money comes in. If they're promised more, if that money's too large for them to drop, say, okay, but now what are we going to do with all this that we filled our budgets into? Then I know it's horrible, but we need to. I feel like it's going to be a problem if the budgets are slashed. Let's say they lose 750,000. Let's say it's $250,000 for so. How much? Yeah. So say you've got £750,000 sorry, and what are you going to do with that money? How are you going to make sure that money comes back in for the 5 years? or the following 4 years. So that's a huge amount to make up for one particular council. So you either stick that money or you lose it. And obviously, if you're financially if that financially jeopardizes the council, then obviously they're going to keep the event. But the most important thing is, if we do keep the event, then we need to bulk our heads together, basically bash the heads together and say, okay, let's come up with a plan. And if that plan is followed through for the next 4 years and it becomes a bit more of a pleasant experience, well, it's not going to be pleasant as such, but much better than what the atmosphere was like in the first year, then at least we can move forward from what we've had last year and come to some sort of mutual ground, I'd say, is the best way to sort of say, yes, we're going to have a bit of disruption, but at least it's organised, and it's causing as little disruption as it possibly can do to Londoners travelling in and out every day, rather than just a free-for-all mess.
I neglected to mention this earlier, but we did have an alternative venue that was viable, technically, I guess, that sort of cropped up in October last year, and that was the XL Exhibition Centre near London City Airport. They proposed this, it's only a small cable car ride away from where I go to uni in North Greenwich, so I was secretly kind of hoping, well, if Battersea doesn't work out, then this would be weird, because they proposed a very strange indoor-outdoor kind of layout. I had no idea how that was going to work. They're just going to rent out an exhibition hall or something. But yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts on that. I mean, I guess in terms of accessibility, it's a little easier to access XL Centre, but in terms of, you can fly people in, I guess, or a lot easier than Battersea Park. We've only got the small train station as sort of the only close point of access, but I'm not sure it would necessarily be a better venue in terms of atmosphere. I'm not sure it's quite the same. I mean, it's good for conventions and sort of board game expos and stuff like that, but I'm not really sure that you could hold a motor racing event there, personally. But I don't know how you guys would feel. But obviously, Paul, you'd be happy just because it's not in the park. So.
Definitely delighted it's not in the park. I mean, we're also desperate to find a real use for the cable car. So if you can get that cable car doing something practical and taking people on board, we'll all be delighted. I mean, XL was designed for huge events, and you have the arms show there. You have boat show, it's always working, and a lot of people move in and out of that area, and that's what it was designed for, and it was in part of Regeneration London. So I don't know if it's a viable place to have a race in, but from a use point of view, it's a very hard working site that a lot of people go to week in, week out, and that's what it's for. And it's a very, very different type of site to a Victorian park in Battersea.
XL's a great venue in terms of what it does. And I take nothing away from Battersea Park. To be honest, yes, it was a horrible build day, and I think I can admit to that. But the race there, it wasn't bad. It was a good race. There was a lot of ups and downs. It gave everything you can. The XL, honestly, I think if Formula E wants to be sustainable, and I think for the first 5 years of this contract, it might Formula E might get away with running at Battersea Park, but Formula E doesn't want to be a 5-year championship then become dead. It needs to move on. So, and I think maybe something at the XL. I go there for university at the University of East London, and you go past and there's car parks there by the airport which are completely empty. It could be turned into a racetrack. Why are they empty? You get people going off the DLR on XL every time. There's so many people that go off there. It's unbelievable. It's just like a huge substitution of people go off the train and people just come on the train. It's so busy at the XL. It's unbelievable. But there's huge areas by the XL which are completely empty. Which maybe Formula E, and it's right by the river, so that, you've got some great scenery and you've got an airport for some planes for plane movers. And,
I mean,
it could be a good venue in the future.
I think what surprised me about the choice of Battersea is the power station now is being rebuilt, and the iconic chimneys are being taken down to be replaced by new chimneys.
Which
so the only
apartments, aren't they?
they're going to wrapper the power station with new apartments, but Formula E doesn't have that as a backdrop. It's just cranes and a building site. And so all you've got is the Buddha Peace Pagoda, which isn't recognized. It looks nice as a sort of Buddha, but it's not recognizable as London, and not everybody knows it's there. So when you see photographs of a Formula E car in front of it, you don't go, oh, that's London, that's Battersea, that's fantastic. It's like, it's a car in front of a Buddha. So
I can agree to that. I never knew it existed until the photo actually happened.
Yeah, and I was scratching my head thinking, what did the Buddha say about car racing and Formula E? There's got to be a brand connection here somewhere. If you go to Exo, I don't know, what are the sight lines like? What have you got on the horizon in terms of the London recognizable buildings, the Gherkin and so on? And that's what you want when you have these races, is to have something which is like an iconic photograph, a camera shot where you say, I know where that race is. That backdrop is London. Yeah. And that's what mystifies me, is how does a load of trees and a Buddha place Formula E in London? And I don't get that in terms of what makes it iconic. It's just a load of trees in a park.
It makes it a bit more unique to some of the other tracks on the calendar. We've got Beijing, which is, for example, which is basically, by comparison, just kind of a track built outside on the what's left of the old 2008 Olympic game. One of the complexes there. And I don't know, I feel that by comparison to Battersea, the Beijing track, I mean, obviously that's the first round of the next season, so I don't want to criticise it too much, but I kind of feel that the Battersea is a bit more picturesque than that. But that's just my personal opinion.
Okay. Can I make you an offer?
An offer I can't refuse.
I've been very curious to know what your experience was as FE Addicts for the event, because I watched it on TV and obviously had the helicopter flying over. So I've done a survey on SurveyMonkey, and I've produced 8 questions, which I hope are neutral, balanced questions, just asking people.
They can't get any more neutral than what the council survey is.
So if I give you the link to it, I'd be interested if you wanted to sort of advertise it and get your listeners to fill it in, because I've put in questions about what did you think of the venue and what did you think of the event and so on, with comment boxes, just to see what people thought, because I've got no feel for how you guys really saw the experience. It's great the cars are here in London. It's great to see everybody and see it happening. So can I give you the link for that?
Yeah.
It's worth pointing out that on the day that I went, it rained quite heavily. So I'm not sure that's kind of slightly dampened the experience after qualifying through no fault of anyone really, apart from the weather god, of course. Just a completely different matter.
I'll give you my story. After a few hours of that helicopter, I thought, if I don't go somewhere quiet, I'm going to turn into sort of an axe murderer. So I thought I'll go to Trafalgar Square and I'll go to the National Gallery and I'll hide in one of the quietest rooms. So I legged over to Trafalgar Square, forgetting it was Gay Pride. And the whole place was locked down with thousands of people, and it took me an hour to actually get across what would have been a 10-minute journey. And the place was this huge party going on. So by the time I arrived, I was in absolutely no state to do anything. I think people are going to dig in terms of opposition, personally. I think it's sort of forewarned. There's been talk about people standing for election against some of the councillors, people like Councillor Hanson, a majority of about 20. So we've been looking at whether to field some councillors against those who sort of just didn't get it involved. So I think next year would see a sort of the next iteration of the campaign.
Really?
People have been rubbed up the wrong way. I mean, I'm chatting with you guys, giving you my view, but I don't think there's goodwill for another year of this. I think all the residents have really seen the council for what it is and the way it's behaved over this. And I think the feeling about what happened to the park for the 3 weeks has hit a lot of people very, very hard who just go about their business, sort of not thinking about these types of issues. But suddenly June just disappeared. The park in June disappeared as a commuter route, as a school route, as a place to go and picnic with your family and friends. So I think it's really galvanized a lot of people to get active, and it's been interesting to see because I said there's 600 events and all the other events come and go and it's no big deal, but this one has absolutely rubbed people up badly, and I think to have another 4 years of it, it's the council are just going to find it get progressively more difficult with their residents and electorate who use the park.
Well, Paul, there might be hope for you yet, because I'm sure you heard out the podcast when I was talking about Miami, that one from the articles, some of the stuff that we've read, that it sounds like there's a similar-ish situation going on there, where after 1 year, it hasn't come back. It's not on the calendar for this year, or currently anyway. I'm just saying that it doesn't. It's not like there's no precedent for this.
It's happened before; it can happen again.
Yeah, I've listened to all your podcasts. I'm really interested in Formula E. I would like to go to a Formula E race, just not in Battersea Park. I would definitely go and see it at Excel because it's more suitable as a destination. So
Paul, I'd just like to, I think we've been going on quite a while.
Yeah.
I think we've covered pretty much everything that we're going to cover. Before we finish, I just want to highlight maybe a couple of the positives of Formula E going to Battersea, and I think a really good positive is the Formula E in Schools series, which is it's a series for local kids. A couple of the races, I think, not everyone, but London was one of them. On the Saturday, I think they did the Formula E in Schools race. So they've got these kit cars, and it's they've had to build them themselves. And I think it was it Coalfield School, or was it the Maritime School? Well, I can't remember which, but it's a pretty similar concept to actual Formula E, except the cars are a lot slower, and there's a bit more emphasis on the educational aspect, I guess, in terms of teaching them that they have to. The energy management is important and all that, but also it's also a little bit of engineering as well. So I think that's a positive, and I also think the whole electric promoting electric vehicles to the public, I think, is important because obviously in terms of environmentally, and obviously the HGVs are a bit contradictory, but I think that's more just kind of that they've just not organised it properly, and that needs to improve. But I think general message that we see on TV that electric vehicles can be cool. I think that's a positive one. So those are just two things that come to my mind right now. And so it's an unresolved issue. Hopefully by the end of the month we'll know what the sort of results of the council's survey are. We'll also link to you the survey that Paul has made, which is for anyone who's visited the race in this year, what you think and what your experience was like as a spectator. But anyway, you can follow us on Twitter at FE Addicts. Jack is at Jack Giordmaina. Paul is, I can't remember exactly.
I think it's Paul SW11. I'll just
there we go, Paul SW11. And I am at Edward J Hunter. And obviously Formula Addicts page. Welcome to join. Look at all the latest news that we've got there. Yeah. So anyway, thanks very much for listening. And a very controversial podcast. A lot of strong views, but hopefully you're more informed now and you have your own opinions. So let us know. Goodbye. Hey everyone, Ed here again. I don't usually do this, but I just want to give an update on what's happened since that podcast was recorded. We got some news earlier this week that the results and decision process surrounding Wandsworth Council's survey has been delayed, so due to the high volume of responses that they got, we're going to have to wait a bit longer. This is a bit disappointing because either way you want the decision to be made as soon as possible. I personally think that if Formula E wants truly to be the leading category in terms of interaction with fans, and so far it's been quite successful doing that with social media and through Fan Boost, then it's high time that people within the sport actually start the dialogue with local residents so that they know how the event impacts their lives. Because I think a lot of the actual team members and even the media don't know the full extent of what's going on here. I certainly didn't before Paul told us. I feel very let down by Gag when he says that he doesn't have to listen to the protesters because they're in a minority, Well, that's no excuse for the complete absence of a health and safety register from either party. Alejandro needs to be diplomatic and take some responsibility here, because either on the company's end or on the council's end, something went quite badly wrong here, and as a result, Formulae's reputation is very much on the line. I don't think I'm alone in my opinion that Battersea residents deserve some answers as to why this had to happen to them without their consent or foreknowledge, and what's being done to improve this in future, if indeed it is going to carry on in the park, as at this point we have to assume it will. We talked a little bit about Excel as an alternative venue, but one thing we didn't mention is, does the UK ePrix have to even be in London? We've got plenty of other well-known cities: Birmingham, Liverpool, York, maybe Glasgow, Dublin, Cardiff. There's a sustainable, viable circuit out there somewhere, probably just waiting for Pico to find it on Route Builder. Finally, just a little word about the podcast itself. The next one's going to be a preview for Beijing. All the regular guests are going to be there. I'm going to try to make a new intro for that one rather than just using the Formula intro, so look out for that. As I like to say, that's all that remains, and thanks for listening.